obviously Putin would love to have just Tokayev, hug a body pillow of Putin. That would be fantastic, but he's playing the cards he's dealt. And right now he's looking at, okay, do I have, Kazakhstan sends me 1,000 troops. It makes no difference to the war, but I also lose my backdoor to sanctions, particularly for airplane parts and electronics, which is really important. B, I lose my most important sheriff in Central Asia. C, I'm probably going to have to send in 3,000 troops to go defend Tokayev when the revolution kicks off again. It's just, the math is not worth it.
It just seems ever since the shutting down really of RT America and all of these Russia Today people getting taken off payroll, we've seen basically almost no attempts from Russia to really appeal to an international audience anymore, as they've basically doubled down on a lot of the same tactics that we saw used in Chechnya when it comes to look, there's a city here. It's going to take a while to take the city. Let's just wipe the city off the face of the planet, and then we'll take over whatever is left of it. And just using that strategy again and again and again, whether it's hospitals being bombed, kindergartens being bombed, or any of these major locations being destroyed, or any of the war crimes that's being committed.
Initially, the account was allegedly portraying a Canadian volunteer fighting somewhere near the Kherson front line from Mykolaiv. There was the account then got more and more absurd. I remember the peak absurdity was when he posted a bloodied tomahawk axe.
I see the bloody axe.
And this is I was telling some story how he butchered the Russian artilleryman. This is when a lot of the account was getting a lot of attention, because he was basically putting people in danger, spouting this kind of nonsense.
Thank you all for tuning in. This is the Ukraine Report. I'm your host, Dylan Burns, and my co-host, AdamSomething, is here as well, but the Azov Battalion has taken away his camera due to bad behavior. We also have with us Michael Hilliard, who is a defense writer who concentrates on a lot of former Soviet states and has worked with the U.S. State Department concerning those states. We also have one of my friends who is helping me host my stay here, who is hosting me here and bringing me around Ukraine a little bit, who is also a survivor of the Battle of Kiev. So we've brought all these wonderful people here today in order to discuss the topics surrounding Ukraine in recent news. And I wanted to start today talking about Kazakhstan. As we know, Kazakhstan has had a long and historic relationship with not only the Soviet Union, but now with the Russian Federation. In January, the Russian Federation actually sent in troops into Kazakhstan to try to save the regime, since they're part of a defense agreement. But just a few months later, we see that Kazakhstan, in front of Putin at one of these economic conferences that Russia was hosting at St. Petersburg, bucked the Russian State Department line and said, we are not going to recognize the so-called Donetsk People's Republic or Luhansk People's Republic. We do not support the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Why is it, Michael, that right after the Russian state saved the regime in Kazakhstan, the Kazakhstan government is saying, no, we're not backing you here?
So Kazakhstan is really trying to hedge their bets at the moment, and it's a really odd time in Kazakh politics. Effectively, to sort of really condense 30, 40 years of history into a couple of minutes here. They've had their president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who was the president since, effectively the end of the communist era right up until 2019. And he was a very, very corrupt man. He was, he stacked all the departments. He made sure it was all his family and friends and everything. Very, very rich man. 2019 comes along and there's big protests and he's removed from power. And he puts this guy, Tokayev, who is effectively his hand-picked successor, who comes in and will not prosecute any of his crimes. And he gets to be the president, but not really the president. So whilst he's not the president, he gave himself the title of Elbasi, which is like father of the nation, I guess. And it gave him things like he can't be prosecuted for crimes, past or present. He's allowed to be head of the Security Council and the Special Services Council, which is effectively spies. He can pick regional governors. He can intervene on any government appointment at any level of government at any time. He can still be Treasury Secretary effectively, but he's not technically the president. And that's where we were until January 2020, when the whole country was in a really bad economic state, and there was just rolling blackouts through the country as people kept selling off the gas to Europe. And then it got even worse when the Chinese Bitcoin miners came in and collapsed the effectively power grid really badly. And then there was these huge protests in January, and it was just nothing like Kazakhstan has ever seen, because it's not a country that has large-scale projects.
Can you just quickly give a quick caveat for the Chinese Bitcoin miners, okay? Because Bitcoin, as far as I know, is an economic boom anywhere it's ever been, and it's great investment right now. It's skyrocketing. So what happened there?
So effectively, Kazakhstan most of its power grid is still remainders from the old Soviet era. It's really some of their old equipment. And the Kazakh power grid was already running right at capacity. It was really struggling to the point where a lot of the country were having sort of 6 hours of blackouts throughout the day. Then in November 2021, China banned all Bitcoin mining inside China. So all the Bitcoin miners went, where do we go? We need somewhere that's cold, lack of regulation, and cheap power. And Kazakhstan's right there over the border. So they all jumped to Kazakhstan, and overnight the power grid went up by 13%. And it just cattled all of the effective power grids. And then on top of that, it came out that a lot of the oligarchs were doing deals with the Bitcoin miners to allow Bitcoin miners inside the power stations to divert power into Bitcoin mining. And that just set people off even further. Then effectively January, we have the removal of all gas subsidies. So the LPG that powers most Kazakh cars. There was a huge protest, nothing like we've ever seen in the country before, effectively. That began in the West and spread right through. And in that time, everyone pretty much associated with Nazarbayev was removed. So his sons had to were pretty much told, give up all your shares in every country or company, or we're coming after you. The only person left in politics at that point was Tokayev. So his whole cabinet is either resigned or kicked out. There's a few remainders, but not very many. And Russia comes in to save the day, effectively sending in the CSTO, which is kind of, imagine discount Russian NATO, but at the same level that Pepsi is to Coke. It's not quite as good. Tokayev is effectively in there because there is no one that can kind of take his place because of the way Kazakh politics works with, Nursultan, which is Nazarbayev's party, gets like 80% of the vote, and then there's kind of a little 10-5 dudes in the bottom. What it meant is that there's no one left who has any national recognition. And Kazakhstan is incredibly important to Central Asia. It's, if the Central Asian states were a family, the Kazakhstan is the older brother who got up and got an accounting job and pays for the Christmas party at the end of the year. It really is monumental to the region. So everyone looked around and went, okay, there's no one apart from Tokayev. And if Tokayev goes, it's a free-for-all with all these no-name oligarchs on who takes the power. And Putin has no idea who would actually take the power. No one does. So you stick with the horse you know. And he picked Tokayev. And Tokayev stayed in power. And Tokayev has effectively just quashed the riots in January. He managed to just keep things under control. Now, the country's not particularly, it's not really stable. He's still trying to gain his popularity and shake this reputation of being effectively a Nazarbayev stooge. So he's doing something. Yeah.
Can I just say quickly, so he's saved by the Russian state, and then a few months later, the Russians invade Ukraine. Not even a few months later, like a month and a half later, the Russians invade Ukraine. 4 weeks. And now we have the Kazakhs going to the economic conference set up by the Russians to try to maybe somewhat show that they're not completely economically dead. And the Kazakhs at this conference look them in the face and say, we do not support your invasion. They essentially say that. Why do you think that is?
So it's actually pretty much it's sanctioned by Putin. So Tokayev, who's the leader of Kazakhstan, and Putin have been in regular communication. And they're working quite well together on this one because Kazakhstan and Putin have done the math on this. If Kazakhstan, who doesn't have a particularly large army, and it never has, because why would it want to? You're just encouraging coups at that point. If they were to send 800 troops to go fight in Ukraine, is that going to change the war? No, it's not at all. It's hardly going to do anything. But Kazakhstan would then face secondary sanctions, and that's horrifying to the Kazakh economy. It's barely holding on as is. So Putin does this kind of math going, okay, well, if they send me 800 troops, I'm going to have to resend in 3,000 troops to go get that under control again. And Kazakhstan is desperately needed for a couple of reasons. One, the international community hasn't sanctioned Kazakhstan yet, but Kazakhstan remains a backdoor for effectively the Russians, particularly with things like airplane parts, backdoor currency, investment. A lot of Russian bank accounts, at the beginning of the war disappeared from Russia and ended up in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan needs to make sure to the rest of the world it is not in the Russian sphere and do not sanction us. And the Russians are very happy with that because it gives them a backdoor. It makes Tokayev much more popular. And it means Tokayev can't be reinvaded effectively because he's very, very worried about that. And if Tokayev was to fall, if Tokayev was to throw his lot in with Putin and say, we completely support this war, we're completely going for it, he would likely face large uprisings to which Russia would have to quash again, so it's not worth it. And they lose their backdoor for sanctions. And as much as Tokayev may stand up and say, we won't help the Russians on sanctions, we're not going to help the Russians, get past sanctions. They'll do things like tell the Russians which border patrol posts are wildly understaffed that week. So the Russians can get their stuff through. So Kazakhstan is acting as a bit of a backdoor for Russians to do this. So Putin has effectively, worked out that sticks and stones break his bones, but words will never hurt him. That's why he's done it at the economic conference. We've seen him do that to he made the West very happy, and a lot of Western guys are looking at putting money into Kazakhstan at the moment, particularly oil and gas sector guys. B, the Chinese are happy with that, which they need the Chinese money rolling in to keep the Kazakh economy afloat. And C, nothing changes on policy-wise. Kazakhstan has never recognized Transnistria or South Ossetia or Abkhazia. Really, they don't recognize it. They don't recognize Kosovo.
Really, any of these states that are not extremely internationally recognized.
Exactly. Kazakhstan is, this is, everyone's kind of looked at this as a big moment, and that's exactly what Kazakhstan wanted. It wanted the West to look at Kazakhstan and go, you're not a Russian clone, no sanctions for you. Let's put investment in you. Let's trust you, because Kazakhstan, unlike Ukraine, really has nowhere else to go. Its geography really, really tanks it.
The Moscow Times and a lot of other publications, and you're saying this is how the West looks at it. Well, this is the argument I've heard from some Kazakhs that I know, that in Kazakhstan there are a lot of Russian-speaking people, and if there is a precedent set that Kazakhstan recognizes that, hey, you have Russian-speaking people within your borders, within this territory here, that's actually historic Russian land, TM, we're going to go in, roll in there and take that. That's a bad precedent for Kazakhstan to recognize, definitely if they don't have a large standing army that could dissuade this type of invasion. And we see that the Kazakh state is largely dependent upon an alliance with Russia to keep its regime in power.
It's exactly right. So in the very north, there are towns, particularly Semipalatinsk, Petropavlovsk, which are majority Russian. They are very much the similar situation to what Donbass is, where it was largely Russian before 2014. So Kazakhstan does worry that this does set a precedent, but obviously, unlike Ukraine, Kazakhstan really has nowhere else to go. It's stuck between the Central Asians, which effectively it's the main economy anyway, China, who there's a huge amount of xenophobia in Kazakhstan, but China is becoming the largest investor, and Russia. All the pipelines that Kazakhstan relies on to get its oil to effectively the European markets all go through Russia. And that's a pretty rough place to be in, unlike Ukraine, which can actually get stuff into the Black Sea and then out to the international markets.
So the way I've read, just a question about that. The way I've read, Kazakhs actually made a concerted effort to sort of lessen the impact of the Russian minorities in the country. So didn't they move the capital, or was it a different country?
No, that is Kazakhstan. So effectively, the old capital, Almaty, used to be right down in the south. So pretty much, Almaty is Kazakhstan is a huge country. It's like 13th biggest in the world or something. It's roughly the size of most of Europe. Yet the capital was effectively in Almaty right on the southern border. It's only a half an hour drive to effectively the Kyrgyz border. So they moved it to an artificial capital right near the middle of the country, probably a bit further north and south, which was called Astana, but then became Nur Sultan as the previous president got kicked out, which is like Donald Trump leaving and then renaming Washington Donald. It was a bit weird, but welcome to Central Asian politics. So it's not to placate
Don't give him ideas, please.
Oh yeah, God! It was super. As a bit of a funny story, it came in as law, and it was so quick that everything moved that all the flight guys and planes didn't know what to do. They're like, "You're cleared for landing in Nur Sultan." They're like, "Where's that?" I'm like, "We can't really tell you where it is. You just have to land." It was a bit chaotic to say the least. But if you go to the north, most of the stuff in the country is going to come from Russia. You go to a shelf and a lot of the stuff, all the basic food stuffs are going to be either Russian or Chinese. They're very, very reliant on Russia to keep that economy going. And call it a generation ago, everyone speaks Russian. Even when I've been there, everyone speaks fluent Russian. That's starting to change. People are starting to speak Kazakh, which is a much more Turkic-based language, but it's still Russian is the lingua franca around the area. So it's a country that's slowly moving to be its own thing, but geography's just ruined most of its chances of doing anything, because where is it going to, it has to either pump through Russia, or it has to pump through effectively the other Central Asians who are just as landlocked. I mean, Uzbekistan is one of only 2 double landlocked nations in the world.
I wanted to talk about something. Do you think we've talked about like the economic response and how Kazakhstan does not want to be included under this huge amount of sanctions that the Russians have been placed under, which is going to cause a huge contraction within their economy. The Kazakhs can't deal with that considering the economic woes they've already dealt with, so they don't want to be part of it. That's part of the reason. We've talked about their own sovereignty issues with something like this. What about the domestic audience? What do the average everyday Kazakh think of this invasion? Because I've heard that they're not very supportive of it. And what about this idea that they don't want, the leadership of Kazakhstan does not want to come off as a Russian stooge right after the Russian state, basically save their regime?
You're spot on. And that's, Kazakhstan, when you go to a bar in sort of one of the major cities, there's quite often going to be Ukrainians there. And there's always Russians there as well, but there is often Ukrainians there. So the popularity of this war is quite minimal. Obviously, go to the north and some of the really, really, really Russian cities, then you get the popularity goes up. But the majority of Kazakhs aren't supportive of this, but they're also not going to, really attack Russia. So that's why effectively Putin has greenlit this. Hey, I don't mind if you call me out subtly, because it's not going to change anything on policy-wise. It probably helps our sanctions case. It helps your economy, and it helps you maintain stability. Because again, Tokayev's only holding on by a thread. He's really, really trying to shake this reputation of being effectively Nazarbayev's handpicked person, or even a Russian stooge. So, Putin giving him this, you can call me this and it doesn't really matter to me, because the Russian press won't really run it that heavily. The Kazakh press will love it. The Western press will love it even more. But does it really change anything policy-wise? Even the guys who call for sort of particularly the big one, which was Nikonov, who's Molotov, the foreign minister during World War II, it's his grandson, is the guy who's calling that Kazakhstan should be reabsorbed into Russia. These are not mainstream politicians. It's the West has kind of grabbed onto these kind of Marjorie Taylor Greens of Russia and said, oh, this is what the Russians are going to do, when they're not taken very seriously. The majority of Russian policy has been, look, if it helps Kazakhstan stay stable, that's all we care about at this point, because we do not want to roll the dice on which oligarch it would be, because they don't know. No one really knows. So Tokayev, the best option for Russia at the moment, let him do some popular things, because it doesn't actually matter to Russia that much.
So you think the calculus has been done that basically that Kazakhstan not being in line with the invasion isn't good, but losing the current regime in Kazakhstan, losing the stability, which causes instability in Russia's alliance system when they currently need to deploy as many troops as possible to Ukraine, would be worse. Therefore, we'll take this on the chin now so we don't have to take a bigger hit on the chin later.
Precisely. And this is, obviously Putin would love to have just Tokayev, hug a body pillow of Putin. That would be fantastic. But he's playing the cards he's dealt. And right now he's looking at, okay, do I have, Kazakhstan sends me 1,000 troops. It makes no difference to the war. But I also lose my backdoor to sanctions, particularly for airplane parts and electronics, which is really important. B, I lose my most important sheriff in Central Asia. C, I'm probably going to have to send in 3,000 troops to go defend Tokayev when the revolution kicks off again. It's just the math is not worth it. So again, it's this, like we were kind of chatting a bit about before the show, Kazakhstan will do things like they ran a big referendum, for some constitutional changes a few weeks ago. And everyone's banging on about, they're allowing the Akims to finally actually speak out and, condemn the regime, which has been a big, on paper, that's a very big move. And a lot of people went, congrats, it's great for Kazakhstan. But when you look a little bit under the surface and, to these Central Asian nerds, you go, okay, but the central government picks the Akims and they're not going to pick people that are going to criticize them. So nothing's actually going to change. It's there's a lot of theater going on at the moment to solidify Tokayev's place and give Tokayev some legitimacy. But at the same time, policy-wise, not too much has changed. They are trying to form better ties to the West and better ties to China, but Russia is still the overall, shepherd of this particular.
Do you think there's going to be any repercussions for Kazakhstan not being in line with Russia on this policy? Moscow Times, again, it's not exactly a pro-Kremlin think tank, but they talked about there being stoppages when it comes to the pipeline of Kazakh oil that goes through Russian territory. There's been stoppages since they started having these issues. Both sides claim that those were just out of their control stoppages, but how much do you really believe that?
It's hard to believe because there's two. One that was done by a storm, and that actually looks like it was a storm that got that one. The second one is Novorossiysk, which is effectively right near Ukraine, and it's the main pipe between Kazakhstan and Europe. The Russians claimed that there was 50 unexploded World War II bombs that they need to deal with, so they need to shut this down for a couple of days. I've heard some sources say that was picked before the speech, but then again, I don't doubt that someone from the Kremlin Foreign Office probably read the speech before Tokayev gave it. I've heard other sources that it comes afterwards. It's really difficult to know. But yeah, it's a bit of a warning because Putin can't be seen to be that weak. He doesn't want some Central Asian country bullying him, so he has to do something to, effectively show that he will respond. But the response is designed for a very quick flash in the pan. It's a week of annoyance for Kazakhstan and things get back on the road because he doesn't want to give this impression to the Central Asian states that he is, not in power at all. It's why he just effectively, his first trip abroad was this week, and he visited Tajikistan to talk with Rahmon, and then he's effectively gone to Turkmenistan, which is another country that hasn't made many comments about the war, and met with the 5 Caspian nations presidents to effectively shore up support. He's looking at Central Asia as still it's the area he can get at least not criticism from, but he's also not demanding that they get very involved. And I think a really interesting kind of case study of this is, he won't allow recruiters in to sort of sit at the train stations in Kazakhstan or the bus stations in Kyrgyzstan if they're wearing Russian uniforms, but, because their governments don't want that. But he's happy to let, civilians go in and do their thing and hey, you should come drive a truck in Ukraine. It's perfectly fine. Nothing will go wrong, but they're actually there to fight. So it's a rhetoric is what we're seeing. Policy, not much is changing.
So, right now, I guess my question is going to be I know that when you conduct a major military operation like this and then it goes awry, which it has, and now you've basically have the majority of your active military that you would send in an operation like this fighting within Ukraine. If there's another security crisis in Kazakhstan, in any other part of Central Asia, or anywhere the Russians would consider their sphere of influence, Syria or somewhere else, this puts Russia in a very difficult position, and it means that when it comes to coming to the negotiating table with Kazakhstan, at least in the immediate future, there's not really a lot they can do in the way of shaking their fist at them, or at least that their means to shake their fist at people have been greatly reduced, right?
Yeah, obviously the Russian expeditionary forces are not nearly as strong as they were. But then again, you also got the 201st Mechanized, which is quite a sort of very well-known part of the Russian army, which is sitting in Tajikistan. And they've pulled troops off every front to go fight in Ukraine, except Tajikistan, because the Russians fear the hell out of the Ukrainians, but they fear the Afghans way more. For very weird reasons. Effectively, every you can't get the Russian army to agree on anything, but almost every officer you meet all refer to the Afghans as the swirling pit of doom. It is very odd. But Russia is very limited and can actually respond to militarily at the moment. And it's why, we've seen over the last 3 days, we've seen large-scale, pushback and riots in Kazakhstan. We've also seen Gorno-Badakhshan in Tajikistan, and effectively very much leading toward a civil war, and Russia's kind of put that more to the Chinese and the local forces to deal with, because they're stretched really thin at the moment. So if Kazakhstan was to go for a full revolution, they now might be the time to do it, and they might be able to pull it off. But then again, if they're so reliant on all the foodstuffs and everything coming in, because again, majority of sort of stuff that is shipped into Kazakhstan will go through the Russian infrastructure, particularly down the Trans-Siberian, and then divert into Kazakhstan when it gets to the proper place. They really can't, completely divulge from Russia without some major economic reforms. Maybe in 50 years, maybe in 20 years, but right now it's asking quite a lot. particularly for a government who is just desperately trying to build some credibility to hold its power, let alone extend itself.
One last question. It's semi-related. I know a lot of Armenians are also particularly scared at the state of affairs right now, particularly because with the Russians so preoccupied with Kazakhstan, if Azerbaijan, backed by the Turkish state, was to make any moves when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh and try to take that territory, then the Russians can't really do much. There's not really anyone in the area to help them out. And in fact, I think Ukrainian officials have seemed almost like a little hopeful at the idea of there maybe being another security crisis in Armenia, because that would mean maybe Russian troops would have to be diverted. What do you think about this?
So this is actually a really, to really condense, years and years of an interesting conflict down to really, really quick. There was you have Armenia, you have Azerbaijan, and there's a state in the middle that was kind of, imagine an island of Armenians living, surrounded by Azeris. And these guys really hate each other. You can go to bars around the world and you can drink with the Ukrainians and Russians. You can drink with Germans and Poles. You can drink with, Argentinians and Chileans. Armenians and Azeris, it's pretty venomous. Effectively, in 92, the Armenians made a big push in and took back effectively the island of Armenians and the stuff around it. And that's where the situation sat, with Armenia occupying about a sixth of Azerbaijan from 92 to pretty much 2020. Then effectively big Azeri push comes in and it just smashes the Armenians down to a very small chunk effectively inside. Russia has effectively been the guy that was selling arms to both sides and was the mediator, and Russian troops are still the gap between the two. So right now there is some Russian troops which are effectively sitting in between those two front lines. So if either side shoots, going to hit Russians first, and the Russians will respond pretty nastily to whoever shot first. Obviously, they probably have, they've always been closer to Armenia. Lavrov himself's an Armenian. Armenia is effectively where Russia launches quite a lot of its Middle East operations from. But at the same time, the Azeris' economy is just so much bigger than the Armenians these days because of the oil in the Caspian Sea. So it's Russia has more interest to keep Azerbaijan happy, but at the same time, Armenia is much more loyal to the years. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of worry. They have pulled some troops off that front. But as long as there's enough Russians, particularly in the Lachin corridor, to make sure the Armenians don't get any, and the Azeris don't get any crazy ideas, it will stay stable for now. But the Azeris have been really pushing and poking it at the situation, doing things like, we're just going to do maintenance on this power line and just cut power to Stepanakert, which is effectively the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh, for like a month, right in the coldest parts. We cut gas, cut off power, do whatever they can to poke the bear and elicit a response, because the Azeri military is so much stronger than the Armenian military at the moment. But Russia at the moment is sitting between the two. But obviously, if things continue to go wrong and the Russians have to abandon that front, that's a huge, effectively you're leaving two children alone that are going to beat the hell out of each other. But I think that's a very last bottom of the barrel. I think they'd rather send members of the Duma to go fight in Russia than they would abandon the gap between Nagorno-Karabakh.
Okay, I think we can probably move on. I wanted to move on to another topic, which I think is everybody's a little happy about to hear, and that has to do with the extremely symbolic Snake Island. So Snake Island, obviously, in the first few days of the war, it got international notoriety due to the fact that there was an interaction between a Russian warship and the people on Snake Island defending it, it is a Ukrainian island, where the Russian warship told the island basically surrender, demilitarize, and the Ukrainian defenders responded, Russian warship, go fuck yourself. Before there was a lot of reports that the defenders died. Later we found out they didn't, that they were captured, and then many of them were able to go home. And for the last 110 days, it's been held by the Russians, and we've seen there's been sporadic attacks on the island, where we'd see footage coming out of Snake Island being bombed and Russian soldiers being killed, and et cetera, et cetera. But recently, And I'm gonna give you guys the Russian state perspective first. The Russian government says that they gave back Snake Island to the Ukrainians as a show of goodwill and hospitality, to show that they're good people. The Ukrainians say that with the support of Western equipment, they were able to bombard Snake Island enough towards the Russians were losing so many men there that it really just wasn't worth it for them to keep this island. That it wasn't really giving them anything for the amount of troops that were dying there, and so that they left. What perspective do you guys think makes more sense to you?
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So basically, what's happened on Snake Island is, of course, not the Russian narrative, not what they say. If so, a very special military operation indeed, it would be. What you said basically is true. Western weapons actually enabled Ukrainians to harass Russians there so much that they had to evacuate the whole island. And a big role in this was played by Ukraine's Neptune missiles, because the Moskva warship was taken down, which was holding down the area, providing air support, like air defense, etc. Now that the Moscow was gone, or the Moskva, we should say, the island basically became open season for Ukrainian high-range weaponry, which they got from the west. So neat. And we saw footage later of Russians bombing their own equipment on the island. And analysts said the reason why we know it's Russians is because 3 out of 4 bombs missed. So one phosphorus bomb at least hit the island. Oh, and by the way, not to derail the conversation, but this just in Moscow, one of their skyscrapers is currently on fire on the 55th floor.
Right now?
In the Moscow center. Yes, right now. I linked it in the Discord chat.
Okay, let me go look at this. I'll look at it on another screen.
Breaking news.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, it is just on fire. I mean, it's hard to say if it. It's hard to say that.
It's the first week of Advent.
I gotta say, as an American, seeing one tower next to another tower with one of those towers on fire, getting a little bit of a flashback here. Don't want to suggest anything, but I mean, we have no clue if it's related to the war or not in any way. I mean, but a lot of stuff in Russia has been just combusting recently.
But at least we know that HIMARS missiles cannot melt steel beams, so...
yeah, true, yeah, so it can't be the Ukrainians.
One thing on Snake Island that I think is particularly interesting, before the whole conflict broke out effectively between Russia and Ukraine, Snake Island had actually been a high point of contention between Ukraine and Romania. Because effectively, if you own Snake Island, the continental shelf and the economic zone you gain from it gives you quite a big chunk of the gas that sits in the west there. So both sides argued it was theirs, but obviously the Ukrainians are probably the ones who had a better claim to it. And I think the Russians were hoping that, look, if we can hold on to this and peace deal comes and that way we're holding on to effectively most of the EEZ that would get a huge chunk of the gas there. Them abandoning it either means that it's just then admitting to themselves they're not going to get that far west, that the EEZ of Snake Island is a contentious point with Romania that's off the table now, that the west is not on the cards, or it's just costing them so much. They were losing just buckets of men, just effectively putting them on the island there. You're sitting them down going, yay, we took this island, and then just getting blown up by drones and missiles. And I can see the Russian perspective that it just wasn't worth it. But long term, if they'd actually held on to it, that would effectively give them a lot of EEZ rights. So it was an interesting for them to admit and go, yep, no, it's not worth it.
So they wouldn't have let go of this for no reason. They must have had not out of just some moment of hospitality. They wouldn't give something like this for some moment of hospitality.
No, they gave it up because they're losing, heaps of men just effectively. There's so much of the footage we see of men, unloading out of helicopters and just getting blown up as they get out. It comes from Snake Island because it's way away from where the usual Russian defenses are. It's pretty easy to hit from effectively the west of Ukraine. Russians that are on Snake Island were just getting absolutely blown out of the water every time. And it was just not worth it. They're gaining nothing in the short term. The Snake Island is a great long-term possession because it would give you the EEZ rights. But in the short term, nowhere near it. So I can see why the Russians have pulled back, and it just shows that the Ukrainians are doing some real damage to the Russians in that particular area.
We should also consider the implications of. I'm sorry, just 1 second. We should also consider the implications of what it means that the Russian Navy / Air Force cannot hold down an island so close to Russian military bases in Crimea.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely an indication of the fact they're not ready for going in here. And again, a lot of people are imagining that, the Russians had thought that Ukraine was going to be 2014. And when they walked in 2014, a lot of people put their guns on the floor and said, don't want to borrow this. And it's why they managed to capture effectively Crimea very quickly. This is not 2014 Ukraine. This is 2022 Ukraine. And they're very willing to fight, and they're much better armed. And I don't think Russia was anticipating any of that coming in. So, yeah, they can take Snake Island, but holding it has just proved such a nasty affair for them that I can see why they've abandoned it. But it's a good sign for people who are, obviously everyone's wondering right now is, will Russia be happy to just take Donetsk and Luhansk and call it a day? Others are saying, no, they're going to lock away that front, and then they'll go push for Odessa and make Ukraine landlocked. And I think this is a good indication that they might not be as confident in their southern approaches as they once were. Because if you held Snake Island long term, that's a huge EZU gain, and it effectively forms a nice point of contention with Romania. But giving this up effectively means they're now probably thinking more short term than long term.
I mean, when we're hearing about the Russian army talking about cannibalizing its training units, right? Mm-hmm. Which the Japanese did that. It didn't really work out well for them.
As well.
The Germans did do that as well. Other historical forces do that. It's one of the last things that an army will do before the manpower shortage really sets in. I think they might have just done the calculus that, look, we don't have bodies to just drop on this island that gives us no immediate benefit strategically. We need as many people as we can around Kherson or Donetsk or wherever it is. And so they ultimately let go of the island. It wasn't some action of goodwill. If it was, they wouldn't immediately start bombing the island right after they leave. If it was this amazing action of goodwill, I think they just got rolled. Honestly, I think they got rolled on Snake Island. I wanted to ask the Ukrainian here what he thinks about it, since obviously Snake Island has a lot of strategic use, but it also became extremely symbolic because it was it was very symbolic of, I guess, like this idea of like Ukraine standing against impossible odds because it must. And Snake Island was one of those examples, as it told a giant Russian warship to go fuck itself, even though it didn't have the defenders to really even hold the island long term. What do you think?
Well, everything you said, and I'll add like a bit of my own personal experience, because Snake Island means a lot to me personally. I worked with archaeological researchers who worked on Snake Island. I worked with marine biologists who worked around Snake Island. I even helped them illustrate new species they discovered of marine flora and fauna in the area.
Yeah, like the Mosca.
Well, hopefully, if it's not too toxic, the Moskva will be a rather good marine habitat now. But yeah, it's really sad seeing all of these places, and Snake Island, or Billy Ostrov as it's now called. I don't know how many people maybe have just been starting to hear about it because of the war, but it's a very interesting place. It used to have a temple of Achilles back in the day, and there is a lighthouse. Hopefully that's still standing even now.
I don't think so. If it's the long white thing, then it collapsed, I believe.
No, not the long. That one's new. It's an old tiny lighthouse. From the last images I saw, I think it was still standing, and it was actually built from the ruins of the temple because they couldn't bring material onto the island because it was too difficult. So they built this lighthouse from the material that's around there. So yeah, for me, it's not just a military, point controlling the Black Sea. It's also part of the culture and the heritage of the country. Sadly, also being heavily hit, heavily hurt from this war, from this conflict. But it was a very good moral victory. It was one of the few days I woke up and my stomach wasn't hurting, because the first news I saw weren't like some town or other being blown and civilian buildings being hit. It was videos of the Russians tucking their tail between their legs, running away from Snake Island, and reading that the first, message from the Russian MOD about their leaving the island for goodwill. That felt so good. you could understand the whole situation just from that transcript.
Oh, sure. The old adage still holds true. So this is my parents' generation who grew up during under Soviet occupation of whatever you heard on the TV. The opposite was
as
true.
a gesture of goodwill toward these poor Nazis. Yeah, sadly, that still holds a lot of water today with the government.
Yeah, denazification, man. Denazification. They failed to denazificate the big rock that was Snake Island. If they can't denazify that island, how can they denazify anything? What a failure. What a failure. Quickly, I wanted to cover something that was an interesting story before we move on to, I know that Adam wanted to cover a few things. It was Russia removed a Polish flag from a massacre memorial. There's this memorial that basically commemorates a lot of basically Polish like anti-communist right after the Second World War that were massacred by the Soviet Union, like 25,000. And so in Russia, there's a Russian flag and a Polish flag that have been like hoisted up in order to commemorate this massacre that happened after the Second World War. And Russia, in response to Poland and Russia's like deteriorating set of foreign relations, has decided to remove the Polish flag from the memorial, saying that they should not have Polish flags on Russian memorials during like such affairs. So when I read this story, I mean, immediately, obviously, it's gross, it's disgusting, it's weird for a state to do something like this, considering the history of why this memorial was made. But it also makes me think, like, do you guys think that the Russians have just given up on trying to appear as if they have any moral ground internationally? As in, like, every thing they say publicly now is just playing to a radical audience, and is kind of ignoring how Poles are going to react, or how Americans, or how the French, or how any viewer outside of Russia is going to react? Do you think they've given up the PR game internationally and are now just playing to a domestic audience?
May I start?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So, what needs to be said about Russian domestic policies and the whole zeitgeist is that this virulent ethno-nationalism, essentially imperialist traditions and attitudes, basically viewing other ethnicities that used to belong to the Soviet sphere of influence to non-Russians as sort of varying degrees of subhuman, essentially. With some ethnicities, this is a bit harsh. With others, it's more so accurate. But like the point is, like they view other people, essentially Slavic people as well, also in Eastern Europe, as somewhat beneath them, right? So that being said, I can tell you that the Kachin massacre was not like Russia didn't approach the Kachin massacre where they massacred a whole lot of Poles, right? They don't treat it as Germans treat the crimes of Nazi Germany, right? So there's much less, okay, we did a bad thing, and much more, actually, it was nothing, it was done by XYZ, wasn't us, and even if we did do it, they deserved it, I'm sorry, etc. So this is just Russia coming clean finally with their attitudes, their true attitudes towards their massacres and genocides they've committed, and it's full on imperial brain. And now they don't even need to hide it that much, because, I mean, hey, what's the point? I mean, they've invaded Ukraine. It's clear as day they are genociding Ukraine currently. So why keep up the charade? Might as well just go all in.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really interesting sort of tidbits here about this. I think in the very beginning of the war, Russia was hoping that they would get a reception in 2014 where there might be some moral pushback, but generally people will let things go. And it was really interesting to watch. You know, obviously my main job is working for a Central Asia think tank, and a lot of guys there watch all the Russian Telegram channels and everything else. At the start of the war, there was a lot of sort of wide propaganda. You know, there was a lot of justifications and whatnot that went to a lot of people, but the Russians seem to have given up on trying to convert these kind of middle ground, normal, like just Poles and who go, oh, it's you know, there's two sides to this, who cares? And they've just moved most of their Telegram and most of their disinformation stuff to effectively hardcores. So they speak, they're real heavy Russian speakers who love Russian conspiracy theories on the Telegram channels, or hardcore conservatives in the US. They've really concentrated, and because they know they're not going to get the sort of the general public anymore. the only people who are going to really rally Russia at this point are Russians, ethnic Russians, and hardcore allies of them. And it's really interesting to watch this pivoted around the sort of 2-month point when they started pulling back and going to the more aggressive strategy, much more, artillery-based strategy. That they moved away from this trying to convince the middle ground and just screw it. Let's preach megaphone time to our hardcore supporters, and that's about it.
Doubling down, effectively, yes.
It just seems ever since the shutting down really of RT America and all of these Russia Today people getting taken off payroll, we've seen basically almost like no attempts from Russia to really appeal to an international audience anymore, as they've basically doubled down on a lot of the same tactics that we saw used in Chechnya when it comes to like, look, there's a city here, it's going to take a while to take the city, let's just wipe the city off the face of the planet and then we'll take over whatever is left of it, and just using that strategy again and again and again, whether it's hospitals being bombed, kindergartens being bombed, or any of these major locations being destroyed, or any of the war crimes that's being committed, as we see that more even Russian Orthodox churches that are still aligned with the Russian Orthodoxy, still being attacked as the monks there are killed. And they've given up the PR game completely. And I think it's just because they know at this point the game is up. The international community has basically decided their position. They're against the Russian invasion. There's no reason to even attempt to invest money and time into appealing to an international audience, because you're not going to be able to get a majority or even a plurality of any people in any of these countries you need to get a plurality of to agree that the Russians are actually right. Let's pull back. And so just play to your domestic audience, because the least you can do is try to make sure your domestic audience buys the party line, buys the narrative. What do you think, Nizar? Yeah.
I don't totally agree. What I would like to point your attention to is how their, let's say, massacre attitude changed after Irpin and Bucha, after how they saw that it's almost impossible to hide war crimes in the digital age, especially war crimes of those scales, because more or less they were conducting cleansing of the area. They were killing men between 16 and 50. They were raping married women because that meant that their husbands were in the army or in the territorial defenses. And just after the amount of negative, feedback from the entire world, from the amount of efforts that were put into investigating these crimes and how much, just digital and forensics investigation were done, I think they scaled that back a bit down. They didn't go all in. They're still doing horrible things, especially in the larger occupied areas like Kherson and Izium, Luhansk Oblast, but it's not coming to the levels of what they did in Bucha and Irpin in those first days.
Yeah, I've read reports of the FSB actually stationed on the border, like the Russian-Ukrainian border, searching Russian soldiers returning and confiscating like stolen property, etc. So there was at least some reaction to the atrocities committed in Ukraine, although that by no means absolves Russia or means that they are less brutal.
I mean, I honestly, it reminds me of that time where a Russian soldier stole somebody's AirPods, and the AirPods you're able to, we kept getting updates about how this person's AirPods traveled from their location in the Kiev Oblast originally to Belarus, and then slowly made its way over to the Donbass before the soldier who stole them, I think eventually got killed or blew up. There might, I think there might be like wider concerns, even outside of just like moral behavior and like making sure we like keep face. But Russian soldiers are not very careful about what they steal or what they touch or exactly what they interact with too.
Yeah, but at least that the owner of the iPad could have just given a call to the Ukrainian artillery brigade. It's like, hi, so I got my iPad's coordinates for you to shoot at.
I think this actually happened with a Ukrainian millionaire had his house broken into by Russian soldiers, and he saw through a security system that the place was full of Russian soldiers. Then he sent the coordinates of his home to the Ukrainian military, who then proceeded to blow up his home, which was just freshly renovated. He gave up his freshly renovated home in order to kill like a few more Russian soldiers. Which
I remember seeing the footage of that guy's call and like the actual footage of the house being bombed.
I have not actually. Could you link that when you get the chance?
I can look for it, sure. And I can add like another anecdotal story that I saw online that I think is noteworthy about a Russian soldier messaging a guy from Mariupol. Hey, are you alive? I need your email to log into the PlayStation. I need the hidden games. Like, I'm not gonna steal anything. I just want to play the games. Don't be a dick. And the guy keeps telling him.
The Russian.
Yeah, I'll add also something from like personal experience. We had I have a friend who was held by the Russians in the early days in Irpin, and she had her phone stolen, and she of course informed the Ukrainian secret services, and a lot of those cases happened where because they take most of the Russians' phones, so they steal the locals' phones to phone back home. And most of those intercepted Russian phone calls that most people have seen or heard online come from those kinds of phones. So like, I can't vouch for their authenticity, but I can say with a very high degree of certainty that at least one series of those calls is real because it's from my friend's phone and her phone was stolen during the early days.
The biggest steal I've heard of is 2 John Deere tractors that they took from, I think, Zaporozhye Oblast, which ended up in Chechnya. And the local company actually could disable them through GPS. It's like an anti-theft system, so the idiots couldn't actually start it. But it's going to be stripped for parts, unfortunately. But their biggest steal, as far as I know, was John Deere tractors from Ukraine.
I think I've seen even more during the invasion of Kiev. They stole things like generators, like heavy equipment, many things. That's the soldiers and lower officers stealing stuff like refrigerators and household materials. The really important guys know what steal.
Like that picture of a Russian truck which was blown out and it was full of like washing machines. And it's just like a truck on the road, like a charred husk full of like 20 burnt out washing machines. That's from March, I believe. I'm surprised Oryx didn't add it to the losses of the visually confirmed Russian losses, though.
Okay, so I guess we can move on to the next story if nobody had anything else to add. Adam, I know you had a few things you wanted to cover.
Oh, sure. So let me get my list going. So the lysychansk withdrawal is, I think, something we should talk about. There has been a sort of media silence over the whole issue. However, at this point, we can confidently say that Ukrainians have in an orderly fashion withdraw from Lysychansk. And this is important because they would have been otherwise encircled. So this shows that Ukraine is now trading its available manpower in favor of the integrity of its army. So that's important. And the front line will now shift. If you have, for example, live UA map in front of you, the front line will likely shift to Bilorivka, Siversk, in the Soledar area. Worst case scenario to Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. And I would say, based on what I've seen and read, that currently the east will remain somewhat static. So, of course, it has been very static even for the past 2.5 months. It took Russians 2.5 months approximately to take 2 of those smaller towns, which are of political value, not strategic. That's important to mention. But what's coming right now is the gradual chipping away of of Russian held territory around Kherson. So from now on, today is the 3rd of July that we're recording this. From this day, I recommend everyone to pay attention to Kherson, the south in general, because that's where the spicy action will happen. Also, in other news that I also wanted to mention, the Ukrainian long-range strikes behind enemy lines in Kursk Oblast in Russia, in Melitopol in occupied Ukraine, and Belgorod, which is also in Russia. These strikes were deep behind enemy territory or enemy front lines, and were conducted by HIMARS and drones, and also a Tochka-U Ukrainian missile, Soviet-made. And the use of Tochka-U missiles in Ukraine have increased, the uses rather, because Ukraine has been getting HIMARS systems, which means they don't have to save as much on Tochka-U's. So counterintuitively, perhaps, the more HIMARS munition and launchers Ukraine gets, the more Soviet long-range missile launchers we'll see from them, because now they get to use it, basically. Biden, I believe, announced more HIMARS rockets and launchers, so that's great. Because with that, Ukraine can continue its current strategy, which is essentially the dulling of Russia's artillery edge and also helicopter and air force edge by targeting its logistical centers. And currently, all major Russian logistical centers are within range. So this is why we see so many ammo depots, helicopter fuel depots, etc., blown up. It's been all over the news for the past week, and for a good reason. And my favorite news for the day, which we can all comment on, I believe, is that the user Canadian-Ukrainian volunteer got finally banned off of Twitter.
I want to talk about that, but first, let's I want to talk about Lysychansk a little bit more. So, with the fall of Lysychansk and the fall of Severodonetsk, it means that that all of the Luhansk region is currently occupied by Russian soldiers. Now, the Donbass is made up, of course, of Luhansk and Donetsk, and one of the
temporarily occupied is. They need one of the biggest goals the Russians set out from the start was that they wanted to quote unquote liberate all of the Donbass, which they still haven't been able to do. They've taken the Luhansk region, but they still have a lot of locations they need to take within Donetsk if they wanted to achieve this goal. A lot of places which are still solidly dug in, and it's going to take them, even if they ended up doing it, it would take them a lot more time to get this done. It's going to cost a lot of manpower, even if they can achieve that, which I'm not very confident in their ability to do so. I guess my question is, with the capturing of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, what strategic benefit has the Russians achieved here? Because I think a lot of this is mostly, I think, symbolic, and I think it mostly is just another step forward in their quest to try to take all of the Donbass from Ukraine. It has tactical value, but it doesn't have any long-term strategic value.
Yeah, so the East, them taking over Luhansk Oblast, from a political perspective, the TLDR it's fuck. From a strategic perspective, is okay. So that's what's happening currently.
The one thing that it will give them effectively is right now Russia, as we talked about when we spoke, a month and a half ago about this, is Russia has moved to a very artillery-heavy doctrine. And rather than trying to pinpoint and hit certain buildings, they're just, going with the effectively car parks can't fight back doctrine. Turn everything to rubble. With Lysychansk falling, it does put more Russian artillery in range of Kramatorsk, which effectively Kramatorsk is where a lot of the supplies and troops are sort of assembling before the final run into the cauldrons. And it will hurt the Russian supply chains if they can really start pounding on Kramatorsk, because it either means they need to pull that back to probably maybe even Dnipro, effectively, to build up everything and go in from there. Not a huge strategic win, but I definitely think you're going to see more and more artillery strikes as these artillery battalions move up closer to the front here.
I guess the biggest thing for the Russians is this is a huge political victory. That for them, they haven't really been able to achieve much from this invasion when it comes to capturing stuff of value from when they originally declared we plan to do denazification. Whatever that ever meant, even though it's completely worthless, they haven't achieved that. Demilitarization, they haven't achieved that. They haven't achieved this neutrality option. They haven't achieved that. If anything, Ukraine is more pro-Western than it's ever been. And so the only thing that's left really, I guess, was the Donbass, and they haven't achieved that either. But this is one step in the direction of them achieving that, since this is the first time all of Luhansk is now controlled by the Russian state temporarily, but they currently control it. And so I guess for them, this could be seen as a propaganda victory when they don't have many propaganda victories. The last time they had something like this was Mariupol, and to be completely honest, it kind of fucked that one up, because they were announcing they took it, then they didn't really take it, then they were announcing that they were going to siege it, then they decided, never mind, we're not really going to siege it, we're going to put our troops in. It took a lot longer than they thought it was going to take. Like, there was a lot of stuff that came in that kind of like sullied this idea of like, hey, we did it and we've planted the flag down, because there was kind of like a lot of false times where they said that and they hadn't really done it. And I guess for them, this is a propaganda victory that they can show to their troops, show to a home audience, to a domestic audience, and say, see, support the war, we'll win eventually.
They probably didn't even give up Snake Island until they had Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, just to balance out the propaganda loss.
By the way, the visually confirmed Russian losses are in for the 2nd of July. If you want to go over them, we can. It's a long list.
I don't know if we need to go through the visually confirmed Russian losses. I think that'll take a lot of time. You were going to say something, Michael?
I was just going to say, the visually confirmed losses would be really interesting to go over. Obviously we don't have time for it today, but I think the Russians are already moving to a war of economy, rather than, this huge, amazing offensives they thought they could launch at the start. They're now effectively just walking up with artillery, bombing everything with effectively World War II shells. And, to try and save themselves money because they've got so many of these shells sitting in storage, and men because they're burning through their manpower too quickly. It just shows that they really aren't looking to throw these huge haymaker punches. It's just going to be a slow, grindy kind of war for them, that they'll just blow up towns, flatten them, and then move up a bit, blow up towns, flatten, move up, which is a horrible way to fight the war. But it kind of shows that this huge military beast that everyone was worried about in February is already thinking about a small-scale economic war rather than the large, grandiose blitzkrieg I think a lot of people thought that might happen.
I'd actually like to comment on that, if possible. The Russian manpower issue will be the crux of this. Essentially, I believe I've read they raised the age limit of service to 65 years recently, which is a super desperate move. That being said, the issue, like the reason why we saw early on,
they're also allowing now people to join the army straight after finishing school.
Oh yes, basically sending kids to die. And the reason why we saw so many blown out Russian columns initially, mechanized columns, this is February, March, April, is because those columns should have been supported by infantry. So, for example, a Russian troop carrier like a BTR or BMP should have carried, 6 to 8 troops or so, but instead they were only carrying 2 to 3. In fact, sometimes the driver, commander, gunner trio was only 2 people, and one person had to play 2 roles. So either gunner and commander, or driver commander, or gunner driver. It was ridiculous, and this manpower problem has only gotten worse. And Putin does not dare currently declare general mobilization, because he doesn't really have the infrastructure. The Soviet times are gone, and those capacities to train millions of people are gone. Number 2 would be demographics. The Russian society has aged a lot since the Soviet times. And C, Putin is afraid of the socioeconomic consequences of him declaring general mobilization, full-on war, sort of wartime economy and wartime mobilization. So that is something he wants to avoid. And a sign of that, I believe, is the aforementioned sending kids to die and 65 years age limit.
You were going to say something quick?
I just did.
Oh, no, not you. I was talking about...
I know.
I was going to say something. If not, then I think that I understand the Russian strategy moving forward. It's the best out of a list of terrible, terrible, terrible options for them at the moment. But I feel like this only works if they have time on their side. if they have the time to take this, that they have the time to do this in the long run, that they have 6 months to a year for them to slowly do this, and Ukraine in that time frame isn't going to get the supplies necessary to stop
They do.
their economy. It can last that long. If their population is going to support it this long, if they're going to have the troops necessary to carry out this long form operation they have the troops necessary, enough troops for 6 months to a year. I mean, a lot of this depends on them having the time to do this, and Ukraine in that time not getting the resources to stop them.
I would argue that they do have the time up their sleeves at the moment economically. The ruble's doing quite well. You know, their economy is not nearly as fluctuating as it was in February. It's very much artificially propped up, but it's doing better than I think a lot of people were thinking it would. But also, I think a lot of Russian calculus right now is two things. One, the midterms, that the West will forget about Russia once the midterms really rolls up, and effectively you will start to see less and less interest in it. But the big one is winter is coming, and the gas price is going to skyrocket, because obviously already we're in a gas shortage, and you know the price always goes up in winter. And you are going to have particular pressure put on Hungary, Bulgaria, even Germany, going, look, you know, even if the Qatari can effectively get their gas up and running to the capacity to refill, match what Russia leaving the market has caused, that gas still needs to be pulled out of the ground and then liquefied and then put on a ship and then transported all the way to Europe, put into a terminal where there's nowhere near enough terminals, regasified, put in the local pipes and put out, whereas Russia can just turn a knob and boom, we're functioning again. And there will be a lot of particularly populist movements in Europe that will be given the, you know, if I'm elected, I will lower the gas price by 30% by flicking a switch. And I guess that is the political point I think Russia is hoping for, that we will get to winter and people will go, well, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and if we're fighting this war, then, you know, what happens? Maybe we just stop the war and maybe I can go back to it. France is already putting some pressure on. We're seeing the Central Asians already starting to put pressure on Ukraine and Russia to end it, because it's having flow-on effects in their economies. I think Russia's hoping that the rest of the world gets just fed up enough that they give up. I think that's, not a great hope, but it's the only card Russia really has to play at the moment. So I'd love to get Adam's thoughts on it, but generally I'd say the Russians have, if they can hold out till after winter, or the other scenario that State Department worries about at the moment is that a Javelin goes missing and effectively a commercial jet gets shot down, and then obviously that question comes in about supplying weapons to Russia. That's what I think the Russians really, really hope for, is that the rest of the world either gives up or starts going, well, why is my gas still expensive? But that's, I think, the only card Russia has really left to play.
I think that a lot of what you said means that the Russian strategy is dependent upon, and I agree with this, Western disunity. That the West is going to eventually look at the situation and give up. Now, when you talk about like the French have put pressure and this have put pressure, a lot of this pressure seems to be like, hey, we heard this report that in behind closed doors, they suggested to the Ukrainians maybe they should accept the deal. But then publicly they're like, wait, no, we never said, because once that gets out, they look like they're the one person who actually said it. So they're the ones like, wait, we never said that. Actually, we're gonna send them a bunch of new artillery pieces. And because it seems that there's a lot of social stigma, which I hope holds against being the one to say, look, I care more about my economy than I care about democracy. I care more about my economy than I care about Ukrainians dying. A lot of these populist movements or populist leaders want to say it, but when they do, obviously they get a lot of heat for it. The question is, how long is that social pressure going to hold? Is Western unity going to stay strong and they're going to continue to support it? I think Biden is a much better leader for this time than, say, imagine if Trump won a second term and Trump was the person in charge during this. Do you think Trump would at all have cared about holding Western unity to try to support Ukraine? Or if
he would have sent javelins. He would have sent the javelins to the Russians.
He would have sent the javelins to the Russians. And so instead, we have somebody who actually I do think has, and a State Department, which I think has some skill in being able to try to keep Western unity intact, to try to support Ukraine. The question is whether or not Western unity will stay. So the main, I would say, Russian strategy, and I think we all would agree on this, is dependent upon the West giving up or the West saying, I've had enough, I don't like these gas prices, and I don't like these gas prices more than I like Ukraine. But if that doesn't happen, let's say what the current playing field as it is stays as it is.
You also have to factor into all of this the food shortage problem that Russia is artificially and purposefully creating. They're also counting on very heavy pressure coming from the developing world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. And the food shortage that's already a problem there is going to be a real headache for the West as well.
Oh, on this issue, I am way more hawkish than most. I would like if of course I view the problem partially as our political elite being a sort of this status quo neo-libish group of politicians who are essentially addicted to the status quo. Don't really like the boat route. Of course, this is not the entire story, but I would say it's a good chunk of it, based on what I've seen and read.
I think it's time to talk about the Canadian, the brave Canadian Ukrainian patriot who sadly is now MIA, missing in action. Nizar, can you tell me about this guy? I know enough about him, but I'd like to give.
I'm no expert, but I can tell the anecdotal stuff I have from my own experience interacting with him. Can you tell me about
this brave patriot?
So initially the account was allegedly portraying a Canadian volunteer fighting somewhere near the Kherson front line from Mykolaiv. And it would always just repost stuff that other accounts post, like their Ukrainian Telegram channels or just whatever Twitter channels. And it wouldn't, the account didn't say that this is me, but it would imply it just by the way of posting. This is how our men work, or this is how we defend the front line, stuff like that. But at some point, the account was obviously, whoever was posting on the Twitter wasn't a military guy and had very little military knowledge, because they were, reposting and talking just like, very silly stuff. Like I remember a report of 1,000-strong Russian convoy wiped in one attack near Kharkiv, and the account was very happy and jubilant. I remember interacting. It was like, are you sure, dude? Like 1,000 soldiers in one convoy? That's very, very unrealistic.
He had first-hand experience. He was an observer, actually, because when he was playing Modern Warfare at home in Canada.
There was the account then got more and more absurd. I remember the peak absurdity was when he posted a bloodied tomahawk axe.
You see the bloody axe?
And this is like, I was like telling some story how he, butchered the Russian artilleryman. This is when a lot of the account was getting a lot of attention, because he was basically putting people in danger, spouting this kind of nonsense. And a lot of people, challenged him, and he would quickly block them or, just didn't interact with them. And the final nail in the coffin was when he posted himself with an airsoft rifle. And the quote was something, "This is me and my battle rifle."
Oh, yes.
At this point, that's it. Even if someone was giving him the benefit of doubt that, whoever was managing the Twitter account isn't competent, that maybe there was some Canadian volunteer out there in the field. After those pictures of him with the airsoft gear and the plate with the carrier with no plate, no armor in it, no actual body armor in it, that's it. It was done. It was obvious he was fake. And after a few hours of that surfacing, he deleted his account.
He deleted it? I thought it was...
No, the account was deleted.
Wow. Yes. Because I've seen Ilya Pomerenko post that actually it was removed through his report. So I think we've been victim of a fake news white noise situation here. No, but my favorite post of it...
I would be surprised if he removed it, because he has no shame. So him removing it out of shame would make no sense to me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw the screenshots of from Ilya Pomerenko that this account has been removed. Thanks for the report, etc. You can look it up if you want to. But my favorite quote from the guy was So the reason why we have to talk about this guy, aside from it being very funny, is because it was actually very dangerous and potentially very, very harmful. Because one of his posts read like so: Mike filled me in on the rats in the cellar. Their anguish sustains me. The more they squirm, the harder I get. So this post of his implies that they have Russian soldiers in the basement, and he's listening to them being tortured and him getting an erection, right? So, okay, aside from this being a 12-year-old's power fantasy, this implies that foreign volunteers in Ukraine are committing war crimes, right? So if one Russian propagandist finds this and then starts circulating this in, like, whatever, Africa, South America, Russia, etc., this is a huge and very, very useful propaganda tool. So LARPers like him are incredibly dangerous because they provide the exact material Russian propaganda is looking for, such as Canadians getting directions to Russian halls of pain.
Based on that writing, I'm 90% sure it might be Ben Shapiro behind that account, because that's the worst writing I've ever heard in my life.
They actually
also helps.
Hey, I have a video on that.
They actually found the people behind the account.
Really?
It was some, like, the guy managing the account is exactly what you imagine: obese guy living in his mother's basement, and the guy appearing in the photos was his, like, or something, who actually likes to live action role play and, like, dress up and stuff. And they posted their pictures and doxed both of them. They're from Canada.
Hey dude, can I take like the 10th picture of you in, like, military gear today? Sure, dude. Why? It's for my personal project, I guess.
My personal project. And then could you imagine you're just like some random, like, airsoft guy, right? You just enjoy airsoft. You just play airsoft on the weekend with the pros because it's your hobby. And then you're out of nowhere, your brother or whoever this guy is in relation to this guy, like, it's like takes it out of nowhere, like an interest in your airsoft hobby, and you're like, oh, that's cool. I'm happy he stopped jerking off to torture porn. I mean, I'm happy you're doing something else for some reason. Happy to see it. He gets off of his fat ass. He rolls out of bed, takes a few pictures of you. You don't really think anything of it. And every once in a while, he does it. He asks you a few questions about war. Again, you tell him what you know, but you're just an airsoft guy, so you must be telling him stuff that's not right. Then a few months down the line, you click a Twitter profile and you see your face in your airsoft gear next to the message of, I really like to get sexually aroused from watching Russian soldiers get tortured.
Dudes rock.
Amazing. Could you? I couldn't imagine.
I would imagine both of them were in on it to some extent. Like, you don't just, like, at some point you start asking questions after, like, the 20th LARP picture in the backyard.
True. I mean, I was like, hey, can I put some ketchup on your battle axe? Oh, sure. What is this for? A school project? The account would always repost the most silly stuff. Like, I remember one video that instantly hit me. This is fake. This is not from Ukraine. It was from I don't remember, either Kazakh or some other, maybe Uzbek TV show series, and it's like a BTR or something driving onto a mine. Like, you could tell from the video quality, from the angle it's shot, that it's not, it's fake. From the uniforms, and the account is like, oh, here are, like, the horrible Russians being destroyed in our brave mine or something like that. Oh my god!
Yeah, well,
man.
What can you do?
I don't know,
it's at least he's banned now.
I mean, he's gone. He's banned. He deleted his account. Whatever it is. I mean, he's outie. But I saw people, like, speaking up about him, like, before, and, like, he would just respond like, "Oh, these are just trolls. I'm sick of all these trolls that are engaging with me." And
I would be interested to see if he made any money off the account, because he had hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, he had like 170,000 followers. He was like a massive account. That's the only reason I'm talking about this, is because it's such a large account. Yeah.
Part of the controversy that started was he was redirecting people to donate for legit Ukrainian volunteers and legit Ukrainian volunteer groups. And when people started saying, but, oh, this guy's fake, volunteers were like, we don't know. He's just, like, sending people our way. So I would be interested to know if someone actually gave him money or, like, helped him personally.
I mean, if we know that he basically all he did was, like, send people in the direction of, like, I mean, I'm hoping this is the case and he didn't scam anybody out of some dough. he just sent people in the direction of aid groups, then that's fantastic because that means he got nothing out of it and other people got something out of it.
It's still detrimental.
It's still detrimental. I'm just fantastic.
Some people were defending him, so like, who cares if he's fake?
No, I'm not defending him playing toy soldier with his bloody like ketchup covered battle axe. Okay, what I'm saying is I'm happy he didn't make any money out of it, and I'm happy that other people somehow at least got something out of this detrimental thing that he did. It's like if I ran over like a child in the street, and like that's bad, but let's say I miraculously fixed his back condition, well then I guess we got something out of it. But don't run over children in the street, you know.
But one of the funniest things
I must correct Dylan before we go on. It wasn't ketchup, okay? It was chili sauce.
Was it chili sauce?
I think so.
Oh my god, that's beautiful.
Keep your stories true, Mario.
But funny thing, he got banned or deleted or whatever on Canada Day.
Canada Day. Oh, national embarrassment.
Rip maple syrup Rambo.
Jesus. Oh my god. Well, I mean, that should have been the first sign. Like that he's Canadian and he's a fighter. That should have been the first. That should have been the first warning sign.
There are a lot of legit Canadian fighters out there.
There are no Canadians have ever fought in the military ever.
Have you guys seen the CGI Bandera Mobile video?
I did see that.
That was cool as hell.
It was awesome.
Yeah, some say that's his car, and he rides into battle, firing that off and throwing tomahawks from the window.
You know those like carnival games where people take axes and they throw it at the wooden wall. You know what I'm talking about? Like the axe throw games at the carnival.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's like where he goes to train. I'm curious, man. I just don't understand like where did the axe come from? Because it's not like that standard issue, right?
No. It's actually sold on Amazon, so you can get it for like $30.
So the idea is, so he just bought the $30 axe and he just
Okay. All his
most of his gear was for LARPing. Even like he had a photo of his helmet, and you could see the plastic chin strap, and like actual military helmets of that model don't have a plastic chin strap. They have like a buckle, so that was clearly airsoft gear.
Yeah.
Wow.
And also his rifle, actually, my favorite part, which we should mention, his rifle was an AK-74U, because AK-47s apparently are banned in Canada, so he had to make do. Now, to his AK-74 rifle, he, to the magazine which was in the rifle, he taped his AK-47 replica magazine. And then the problem is, though, that AK-74s are NATO caliber chambered, and 47s are Soviet calibers. So the two are just don't fit, right? So it's like trying to plug a VGA cable into an HDMI port. It just doesn't work. But he still paraded around with his AK-47 mag taped to his AK-74 rifle, and then people called him out, and then he got triggered, and two days later he got banned. So rip.
Honestly, when I think about this, do you think, you know how people like do this, like I forget what this is called. I think it's something like false service or something. I forget, what was it called? Stolen valor. Yeah. There's always been an issue of stolen valor, because there's some like about a credibility that you get when you've served in the military, because you've put yourselves in harm's way for the protection of others. That's the gist, right? So I've always wondered about like what if that type of thing deserves a punishment, and what type of punishment that deserves, because different countries have different punishments for it. Do you think one of the punishments for stolen valor should be you get drafted?
Oh, absolutely.
I think that would be a good.
Shoot to the front.
I think that's the exact kind of person you don't want on the front next to you.
You need distractions and diversions. You need somebody to carry ammo.
He can always be a suicide bomber.
No,
I don't think we have those yet.
Not yet. I don't know. I just feel like I feel like it's a good punishment. Like you take them and they just, I don't know, like they just shovel ammunition around for like a year or two as punishment. It feels like it makes sense, because the punishment fits the crime. Like I think perfectly there.
Oh, speaking of stolen valor,
was that Michael?
I was going to say, drop him into Red Square, give him 12 hatchets. That's it. War's over, boys.
Just drop him in.
Everyone go home. We're done.
Exactly.
The box of tomahawks. There's the Kremlin. Go, champ.
Exactly. We'll call him Shambo.
But actually, speaking of stolen valor, I also wanted to mention he was really, really fond of badges, and he had a whole bunch of them. For some reason, he was wearing a World War II French paratrooper badge. No one knows why. I guess it looked cool, but he's
multiple wars, did he?
Hell yeah, and also
He was in the Rhodesian Special Forces.
Yeah.
Made him 78 or something.
Yeah, he had two SAS badges from like SAS Rhodesia, which was rich, I would say. Mm-hmm. Considering the guy must be like 30 years old. Rhodesia, I think, has not existed for like 43 years.
Yeah, I could look past World War II paratrooper, but Special Forces Rhodesia, it's a little too much for me.
There was also Ukrainian paratroopers, Ukrainian special forces, I believe.
IDF.
IDF.
IDF as well? It's some crazy made-up stories about, I was with the IDF in some mine desert, and one of the troops was like, do those mines work? I'm going to jump on them and test. And I was yelling at the trooper what are you, crazy? Ha ha ha, military life, it's so crazy. Something stupid like that.
He's a
suicide.
True Renaissance man.
Truly.
Connoisseur of multiple wars and regions.
Look, the IDF is known for playing hopscotch with live mines. I don't know what you guys are talking about. It's a cultural tradition over there. It's in the Talmud, I think. I think it's in the religious teaching of sorts.
Well, I'm no Talmud expert.
Yeah. See, you can't tell me I'm wrong, can you?
Gotta ask Shapira about that.
Yeah, gotta ask a Jewish religious expert. I'll be the company man for this today. Is there anything else you guys wanted to cover now that we're done with Rambo?
During that famous Putin picture with, I believe, Sergei Shoigu, when Putin was grabbing the table, he was grabbing it because he was preparing for the tomahawk. He could fly in any moment through the window.
He was ready to dodge. He was under the table. The table was so big. If he just would have crawled a little faster, he would have gotten him, man. Man, it's crazy, man. He serves with the French paratroopers. He serves with the Rhodesian Special Forces, the IDF, and in Ukraine. And we can't even let the man have a Twitter account. It's shameful behavior, really.
We should have him on the show, actually.
Yeah, he should get a Fox News segment. He should go on Tucker Carlson tonight and complain about how he didn't get respect in Ukraine.
Cancelled.
Yeah, cancel Ukraine. Doesn't respect the troops. Doesn't respect Rhodesian Special Forces anymore. Okay, man. Thanks everybody for coming on the Ukraine report. We're ending it on a sad note with the loss of our true soldier. I'll make him a custom Dylan Burns medal if he wants it. All he has to do is send me a DM and I'll send it to him. Thank you all for coming on. You want to shout out your stuff quickly?
If you want to check out my stuff, I run the Red Line podcast, which does a geopolitical topic each fortnight, whether it be the European gas industry or Chinese influence in South America. And I also host the show Spotlight on Central Asia, which is effectively going over the biggest stories in Central Asia over the fortnight, as well as interviewing big experts on issues like the Trans-Caspian pipeline or Putin's recent trip into the Caspian states and discussing policy around there. So if you're really into Central Asia, you can listen to that one. If you're into geopolitics generally, you can check out the Red Line.
Okay. Adam?
Yes. Sure. So I'm Adam on YouTube. AdamSomething. I make videos about train good, car bad, and great show.
Nizar? I'm Nizar. For now, I'm not gonna dox myself, but if you want, you can follow me on Twitter, Nizar Al Commander, and hopefully in the future I will be revealing a bit more who I am and what I do. And for that, stay tuned.
You're actually involved with Canadian Special Forces and the Rhodesian Special Forces.
So we heard.
Ixnay on the Canadian scale. But if you're interested, stay tuned to Dylan Burns' channel and his Discord, and maybe you'll hear and see a bit more of him.
Oh, my alarm just went off. And over to Adam. What do you do, Adam? Are you a person?
Excuse me, what do I do?
Yeah, what do you do, Adam? Nobody knows who you are.
Well, I do things. Sometimes I sleep. Sometimes I eat. Currently, I'm drinking beer, but mostly I'm I'm making videos about transit and urban planning nowadays Ukraine. And that is as far as I will go for now. I'm going to have actually a live meetup in Prague on the 30th of July. And if you didn't get a ticket so far, well, then only you can hope that a place will free up. And if it does, just DM me on Discord, I guess, and we'll see what we can do if you're interested in coming. But it's 30th of July, and exact time and location only for people who signed up. So if you're interested, let me know.
Yes, they're planning how to start a nuclear war from over there. They're gonna attack grain shipments.
Hell yeah.
AdamSomething. If any of us were in the Ends Times called, I'd pin it on AdamSomething. I feel like it'd be him.
Sure.
He fits the profile, you know.
I mean, actually, that position of mine is basically is coming from the. If you ever wondered what you would have done against Hitler, you're doing it now, right? So this is why I'm willing to go on much harder on this. Because also having read much about the Russian nuclear doctrine, I'm much more comfortable saying that there won't be a nuclear war. Of course, this is actually funny because tankies in particular have been using the nuclear threat to kind of concern troll about this whole thing. And the nuclear threat is a huge concern troll for pro-Russian actors of like, hey, you want to support Ukraine? Buddy, do you want nuclear war? No? Thought so. So that's how it works, basically. Which I think we should not give in. And especially in light of how Russian negotiations work, just if you have 0% of something, just demand 100%. Like, we want 100% of X. We have 0%, we want 100%, or else nuclear war. You're dead. Boom. It's over. Done. And so then you bank on Western decision makers to get scared of your threats and be like, okay, well, we don't want to die in nuclear fire, therefore, because that's the threat usually. Therefore, let's give him 20% of X just to appease them, and then Russia gets the 20%. They're like, okay, fine, we'll back off for now, and then. The end result is Russia has 20% of X, and they didn't have to do anything for it. So just the threat itself was enough. So this would be, of course, I'm simplifying a lot, but this would be the basic gist of the Soviet modus operandi when it comes to these forced negotiations and coercion, essentially.
Yeah. In other words, you're an international suicide bomber.
Hell yeah.
Okay.
In the end, who would want to end the world for Vladimir Putin? Like, he's the least inspiring of all the dictators.
That's the other thing, yeah.
Yeah.
No, like the other thing that makes me confident
here. Family. Those guys are the bomb, man. But not.
Hell yeah for the Kims. But not for Putin.
Their music's fun, man. They got
best Korea, real Korea. I mean Korea. Yeah, but also like the Russian oligarchical elite is too invested in their like Swiss and Italian villas to have it all go up in a puff of smoke. Whereas during the Soviet times, people at the top sometimes even believed what they were saying. So that's what was really dangerous. Now it's a bit different. Now it's all about money.
Well, I don't know how I feel about forcing the blockade. I don't know if I'm on board with that, but I do agree that you cannot just let a man just come out, say, here's my nuclear, take it, like unzip his pants, take out his rocket, and say, I put it on the table, you have to listen to my demands now. Because, if you do concede to that, then what you're going to be telling them is the more nuclear threats you get, the more concessions you get. The more nuclear threats you make, the more you make this the international norm that you can just threaten nuclear war and then annex large swaths of territory, the more likely other states are going to be like, well, I want to retake so-and-so territory, which I think has the blood of my people in it, so I'm going to get a nuclear bomb that nobody can stop me. You don't want to encourage this type of behavior. You can't encourage this type of behavior.
Absolutely. So there will be a flashpoint eventually where you stand up and there's going to be this awkward pause.
You pick up your tomahawk and you say, go home.
Hell yeah. And it's like there's going to be this awkward little pause of like, okay, are they actually going to duke us? And then you wait a couple of seconds and
there's one last thing I want to talk about before you all leave. So I'm going to kill Michael and make him stay for a little bit longer. Okay? I am so sick and tired of people who ban Twitter in their own country having Twitter accounts. Every single one of them are fucking rodents and rats and cockroaches. How can you think that you yourself are suitable enough to have a Twitter account, but literally nobody else in your country is? The Russian officials do it. They do it in Iran. They do it in so many countries. It's gross. It makes no sense. You don't see like officials from America on Russian Twitter or Iranian Twitter, whatever that is, right? Well, it doesn't really exist. But if it did, I don't think we'd see it. Like, why do we see so many people doing this? if their people aren't, or if Twitter's not good enough for the Iranian and Russian people or the North Korean people or any of these people, why do we see their officials on Twitter?
Well, Trump's on Truth Social. There's a lot of Russian money in Truth Social.
True. I'd like to see Russia start putting accounts on Truth Social instead. That'd be bang. I'd love that content. Seeing them interact with us like 20 Q accounts every time. Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, obviously. I was going to say in Central Asia. Yeah, they I think there was some guys on Twitter. In Turkmenistan, it's completely off. Like, not even the officials do Twitter in Turkmenistan. But yeah, it's very weird that effectively everyone has VPNs, but their argument is that it stops dissent and false news getting out. But yeah, it's 100% just to keep the lid on things and stop very quick protests forming and videos and whatnot. I know that right now with Badakhshan, with the work we're doing out there, because they've cut the internet out to that, that entire half of the country has no internet. The only way we're getting anything out there, because they'll attack anyone who has a satellite phone, is getting guys to jump over the border into Afghanistan and call in their reports to us before they jump back over into Tajikistan. So it's absolutely ballistic.
I just don't understand how you on one hand can say we need to stop the truth of misinformation, but I can be king of the misinformation and you can jump on Twitter. I just don't understand that, man. It's like if a teacher was like, no eat chewing gum in my class, and then takes out a big just ball of gum and just puts it into its mouth, just starts chewing. It feels like it's just like a little too on the nose almost.
I had a teacher who did exactly that.
Wow.
I mean, to be fair, Dylan is CIA, so.
That is true. I am a CIA agent. Did you see that, Michael?
No, I knew it though.
Do you know the head of the CIA?
I was changing my buddies at the FSB, and they were just telling me about your CIA connection.
Thank you. So basically, the idea is the head of the CIA's name is Bill Burns.
Yep,
that's the connection.
Got him.
Yeah, I saw a Reddit thread once about the red line, and someone was like, "Oh, the host is connected, and he's actually working for the Kyrgyz government." I'm like, they don't even have enough money to pay themselves. What are they paying me for? I wish they were paying me.
Oh my god, man. God, dude, honestly, there's a few, there's some things I wouldn't take Fed money for, but like, if the Ukrainian government ever wanted to pay me money to of course I'd take it. Are you kidding me? And anybody who said they wouldn't take it, I think is a liar. Of course I would take the money, as long as I feel like it's for the right cause. Yeah, of course. I'm not going to take American money to go to Yemen, but I'll take American money to go to Ukraine, of course.
Next week, Dylan Burns presents top 10 reasons North Korea is best Korea.
Best Korea, man. Best Korea. Obviously, best Korea. The music's better. That's the first reason. Second reason, the people are shorter. So they don't need to make bigger buildings, smaller cars, more fuel efficient. If you care about the economy, they emit less emissions than the South Korea do. Just look at the day and versus nighttime maps.
Much thinner. Much thinner as well.
Much thinner. They're more diet conscious. They're going on a diet. They're very no Pilates even. That's just the natural North Korean fit. There's a lot of reasons why I think it's the best Korea.
Yeah,
it's not fatphobic at all. They even elect people of size democratically.
That one person took it upon himself, such a saint he is, to take all the excess calories in the country.
Yeah, it was really nice of him. It was very kind of him. He's such a kind soul, man.
Kim Jong-un had a heart attack for your sins.
Amen. Amen.
The real Burger King.
In America, there's a lot of questions about extracurricular activities in camp during the summertime, and parents not being able to watch over the children. In North Korea, that's not an issue. If you want to go to a camp, it's fantastically easy to go to camp in North Korea.
Oh yes.
Alphabetically, first Korea. Alphabetically, way better than South Korea. Plus, here's the thing: democratic right there in the name. Look at the other Korea, not even democratic in the name.
Doesn't say it in
Republic. That's not even democratic.
No, that is true. That is correct. That is a valid argument. That is true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's, oh, I gotta say, actually, better benefit, they don't have the fucking Moonies, okay? That doesn't exist in North Korea, okay? That is an actual benefit, not having to deal with those psychopaths, which I hope maybe in a future episode when the Moonies invade Russia, we can talk about that. Anyway, thank you all for having for coming on tonight. I don't want to keep you guys any longer. I know it's pretty late. You guys have a good night. You guys all sleep well. I don't know what I'm gonna go do. I'm gonna go just look at a distant minefield, drink a martini and cry. You all have a good one, okay?
Thanks. Great show.
Thanks for having me on.